everyone. My name is Sarah Anderson. I am a lecturer in the Animal, Dairy, and Veterinary Sciences Department at Utah State University. I also instruct courses for our Equine Assisted Services certificate here at USU and train and condition the herd used for our community program lessons and academic classes. Today, I'm going to be talking about preparing your horses for summer and conditioning our lesson horses. Typically, summer months are much busier in EAS programs and lesson programs because there are longer days, more sunshine, it's better weather, and we want to make sure that we are getting our horses ready for the added work and keeping them in shape. About the physical and mental check-in we need to do with our horses as we then devise their conditioning goals. I'm going to talk a little bit about schooling sessions and then targeted exercises that we can do. When we start to consider a horse's conditioning and training plan, we should always start with a physical and mental check-in. We want to know, does our horse perhaps need a break from some of the programs they're involved in? Do they need a change in routine? And that change in routine may be changing up their schooling sessions outside of lessons, or it may be doing different kinds of lessons to help ensure that they are both physically and mentally in a place to be healthy and happy in the long term. So some signs that something needs to change in your horse's routine are going to be overall fatigue. There may be a loss of focus, delayed responses to cues. We've all seen that. A participant squeezes the horse with their legs and the horse does not move forward. That is a sign that maybe there's something physically or mentally going on with that horse, or simply a lack of understanding of that cue. They may have increased spookiness or response to external stimuli. They may be irritable and show resistance. Pain behaviors may be present, and this is really an important piece to consider. If the horse is demonstrating signs of pain, we need to take a step back and address that pain before we can move into conditioning that horse. If they're stumbling or dragging feet, again, that points to a physical concern. Loss of impulsion, they drop out of the gates before being asked. There's a lot of variability within their speeds. Excessive sweating, heavy breathing, slow to recover, and elevated heart rate, slow to recover. So if your horse is showing signs of these things, it's going to point us in the direction of needing to change something about their conditioning routine, potentially dive deeper into their health, or giving them some mental breaks from the work. Getting a little more specific into that physical and mental check-in, we want to really evaluate our horse's current health before we devise a conditioning plan. First and foremost, we must check that horse for pain. If a horse is in pain, they're going to be compensating somewhere, and they're not going to be able to be using their body in the way it's designed to be used. And that's going to take a overall physical and mental toll on them. So if you're not familiar with a horse's grimace face, I highly encourage you to look into that. There's also something called the 24 pain behaviors of a horse that is signs of pain under saddle. We don't have time to get into that. That's a whole lecture in and of itself. But do some research into the grimace face and signs of pain behavior under saddle to really determine, does your horse have any of those signs? Are they lame in their gait? Are they uncomfortable? Are they sore in their back? Because that's what we got to address first. We also want to evaluate their skin and coat health. Often their skin and coat health is going to be an indicator of internal health. Their body is going to be putting nutrients toward that skin and coat last. So if the coat is shiny and the skin is free from dryness, that's going to be a good sign that your horse is doing pretty well. We want to make sure that their feet are done well, that the farrier work is maintained, that they're growing a good foot. Everything starts from the top and goes up. If the foot is unbalanced, cracking, splitting, that's going to affect the whole horse. We want to think about their nutrition. Are they getting enough nutrients? Are they getting too many calories, which often is a problem for some of our heftier breeds like our Norwegian fjords? Are they getting a balanced diet? Do they have access to salt? And then body work and veterinary work is so important. There are massage therapists, chiropractors, physical therapists for horses that all can do a fabulous job at checking in with your horse's physical state. And then if there's something more concerning, talking to your veterinarian, ensuring that we are looking into any lameness issues, any long-term pain issues, and we're getting those addressed. We also need to make sure that their teeth are up to date, their saddle fits, right? All of these components are going to go into creating a strong conditioning plan. So we got to get our base of support correct before we can then talk about those specific exercises. Once we've kind of gone through that checklist, we want to do an assessment of our horse's physical ability. Where are they strong and where are they weak? The top line is an extremely important part of our horse. It is the foundation. It's where our riders sit. It is how the horse propels itself forward, and it's how they protect their back. We want to make sure that they have a strong top line and muscle development throughout their body that's supporting healthy movement. One thing to look at is symmetry within your horse. If you look at your horse from square on at the chest, do their shoulders look the same? Is there one bigger than the other? Is there a pectoral that's bigger than the other? If you look down their back, is one side more developed than the other? Same thing with their hips, their stifles, their gaskins. If a horse is asymmetrical in their muscle development, that tells us that there's some imbalances in their body. And we're going to want to do some targeted exercises to remedy those imbalances to help encourage our horse to move straight and balanced. We also want to check in with our horse's endurance. Think about, when was the last time you had your lesson horses trot around for 5 minutes without a break? Are they able to do that? Can they canter for 2 to 3 minutes without a break? And when they do those canter and those trot sets, can they come back down and bring their heart rate and respiration rate down within a few minutes? Now, our lesson horses may not need as much endurance as sport and performance horses, but they should have a level of endurance so that they can be strong and support our riders. So now as we start to think about what our conditioning goals should be, there's 3 main training and conditioning goals that everything can kind of fall into. One is improving the horse's movement. The way they go, the way they use their body, the strength of their top line, all of that falls into that movement improvement. Then we want to increase their responsiveness to cues. This is sensitizing the horse. When we put our leg on, does the horse readily move forward? Now, there's many reasons why they may not, and typically they don't understand the cue, or the cue has become dulled and desensitized, or they're not physically capable of responding to that cue, which is something that we need to work on in our schooling and training sessions. We also want to keep in mind that there is a level of decreasing responsiveness to external stimuli that needs to occur, the desensitization. We want to make sure that our horses are not responding to external stimuli in negative ways. For an example, if we are working on training outside and a car drives by, we don't want our horse to respond to that. A lot of the things we're going to talk about today is going to be focused on this first goal, which is improving the movement and way of going of the horse so that they can do the jobs we need them to do. So now I'm going to get into some specific schooling session information, how a training, conditioning, or schooling session should be set up, and then targeted exercises to improve the strength and conditioning of our horses. So I always want to start my thinking with the warm-up. The warm-up is key to setting your horse up for success physically for their conditioning session. There is so much power in walking your horse. And when I say walking, it's not a leisurely stroll, kind of dragging their feet. It is an active forward walk. We want those horses stepping underneath themselves. We want them flowing through their bodies. And we want them to walk for 10 to 20 minutes before we ever start some intensive exercises. The older your horse, or the more arthritis or injuries they have, the stiffer they are, the longer you should walk that horse. This is going to help lubricate the joints, help heat up the tendons and the muscles, and prevent injury and pain long term. So there's many ways that we can incorporate this walking warm-up before our session. We can simply hand walk our horse, lead them around. We can lead them around outside on the property in an arena. You can be riding your horse and just ride them on a loose rein with that focus on activity from behind, getting them moving forward. You can lunge them, but if you do lunge them, remember, we want this to be a walking warm-up, so keeping them in the walk and working on big circles. If you have access to a hot walker, that can also be a fantastic tool to use, which takes a little less manpower. You can put multiple horses on at once and get them walking. If you do use a hot walker, be very mindful of the kind of footing underneath the pathway the horse is walking so that it is supportive of their joints and not detrimental. So the reason why we care so much about having this good walking time is it's going to increase the blood flow within the horse. It's going to physically warm up the muscles, stretch the muscles, ligaments, and tendons, and increase flexibility and lubrication of the joints. And it does help with the mental focus of our horses. Once we've done our 10 to 20 minute walk warm up and our horses are physically getting warm, their joints are moving, we're going to then think about warming them up in a way that's going to help stretch their top line, engage their back, increase their cardiac and respiratory effort, and continue to increase that mental effort and focus. So this second part of my warm-up is where I like to focus on forward gaits and stretching of the horse. When I talk about stretching, I'm talking about when the horse is long, low, and out through their frame. So this means their poll is at or just below with their height, their neck is elongated, their nose is on or just in front of the vertical, and they're lifting through their body, so there's some roundness through their frame. We want to avoid their nose curling back behind the vertical because that's going to be locking them up in their upper neck. Instead, we want to get them moving and flowing. We want to watch for signs that the horse is getting more relaxed and loose to the top line. This can be their tail will gently kind of swing back and forth. This can be them doing those reverberating sneezes, the ones where they kind of are blowing all that air out and just like vibrating through their body, showing that they're loosening those muscles and using them. We want to see them encourage and want to stretch down into our hand. We want to also spend some time with the walk, trot, and canter. Even if our horses are primarily walking in lessons, we want to make sure that we're stretching all the joints and using all of the horse's capacity and doing some trot and canter so that they can increase that respiratory and cardiac effort, which is going to help blood flow. It's also going to help blood and lymph go up and down the horse's legs as they're moving and hitting the ground. It's going to really engage the whole horse's body. So once we've warmed up our horse appropriately, we can then do some focused exercises. So our focused exercises are going to be things to build fitness when we're thinking about conditioning. We want to increase muscle and really like the muscle skeletal system. So we want to get stronger muscles, tendons, ligaments, joints, bones, okay? But we're going to primarily think about muscle because that's the easiest to see grow when we're looking at the top line, neck muscle, forehead muscle. We also want to build in some cardiovascular fitness. Just like with people, it is important for horses to get their heart rate and respiratory rate up multiple times a week so that their body is pumping, their blood is pumping, and it's taking toxins out and putting oxygen into all of those tissues. So here are a couple of key points when we're thinking about focused exercise. Long and slow distances are going to be really great for building muscle. Walk is one of the best gaits to build muscle in because the horse has to lift each of its feet individually. There's no momentum like in the trot and canter to keep the horse moving forward. So walk is a really powerful gait. And that's especially important when we think about our older horses who can't handle the same concussive forces on their joints as a young horse may be able to. We also want to do a little bit of speed work. Lope for lung is how I remember that loping or cantering is going to be one of the best ways to increase a horse's respiratory and cardiovascular system. And then as we do our specific strength work, we want to focus on specific muscles throughout the various exercises. The techniques and skill work we're going to do is going to develop the muscles that horse needs for their job. And primarily our horses in lesson programs need strong top lines, developed cores, and strong hind ends to be able to support our riders, especially our unbalanced riders. So now I'm going to talk about some specific targeted exercises, starting with the simplest, long walks. When we take our horses on long walks, that's going to increase their strength, as I mentioned in the previous slide. So you can do things such as hacking out or going on trail rides. Okay, if you don't have access to some trails, even walking around the property under saddle or in hand, so being led, is a great way to get your horses a little more alert, moving around, trying out different surfaces, and getting out of the monotony of the arena. If you have horses that are good with each other, you can even pony another horse next to you. This can be a great way to work two horses in the same amount of time as it would take you to work one horse, which often we are limited by time in our lesson programs. So taking horses out on 30, 45-minute, even hour-long walks is really going to help develop their strength. Now, if your horse isn't used to walking that long, we always want to start with less and slowly increase the amount of time we're walking. We also want to add in trot and canter sets to our work. Find your horse's limit. How long can they trot before they're going to start to fatigue? If they trot for 2 minutes and it takes them 5 to 10 minutes to recover their respiration rate, we may need to work on that 2-minute time for a little longer until they can recover quicker before we start to increase the length of time we're asking them to trot or canter. But letting your horses really move forward is key. So I mentioned this earlier, but I want you guys to think about it. When was the last time your lesson horses cantered for more than 2 minutes straight or trotted for more than 5 minutes straight? If it's been a while, that may be a cue to you that you need to spend a little more time doing some trot and canter sets outside of lessons so that your horses can really move through their bodies. Hills are one of my favorite tools. If you have access to a good hill, you can do so much conditioning for your horse. It doesn't have to be very long or very steep, but working your horse up and down hills is a great way to get them engaging their hind end and their abdominal muscles more. And it's a way that anyone can get our horses to work, even if they're maybe not the best rider, the best handler, because the hill is going to be doing the work for you. You can ride your horses up and down hills, lunge them up and down hills, or lead them up and down hills. And that gives you a lot of options to find a volunteer that can do one of those three things. Because I know we don't all have volunteers who can ride a horse well and in a way that's going to develop that horse as we need for lessons. But I'm sure you all have a volunteer who can walk a horse or lunge a horse. If you are doing hill work, it is best to do work at the walk. That's going to make them have to push off every single foot individually. You're going to find a lot of horses want to trot up and down hills because it's more efficient and easier for them. So challenge your horse to do it at the walk. And again, start slow and build up as they develop. Ground pulls and cavalettes are one of my favorite things to use in training. It really varies the exercises so our horses don't get bored and our volunteers don't get bored as they're training the horses. So ground pulls is just a pull on the ground, and there are infinite ways to set these up. You can do long lines of multiple pulls in a row. You can do just a couple pulls. But setting up pulls and getting your horses to walk, trot, and canter over them is going to increase the flexibility within their joints. It's going to increase their exertion and strengthen their top line and their abdominal muscles, because as they step up and over those pulls, they have to lift their leg higher and engage their body when they're doing that. And you'll also find as a horse is doing a lot of ground pull and cavaletti work, they'll naturally want to start to stretch down into that longer, lower position, because that's creating room for that hind end to step underneath as they go over them. It's also a great way to develop proprioception, which can be a skill some of our older horses start to lack in. I've definitely had those horses that start to stumble a little bit. And when we start to see those, adding some pulls into their routine helps them to be conscious of where they're putting their feet, and it increases that dexterity and proprioception. So you can do pull straight on the ground. You can also do them raised on one end or both end. The higher the pull, the harder it is going to be to work. You can also maybe find some natural logs to lunge your horses over in small little jumps, like 12 to 18 inches, and that's going to engage the horse in different ways. It's going to ask them to sit on their hind end a little more, push off a little more. You do want to be careful if your horse has some front end or hind end arthritis. Maybe the low jumps isn't going to be the best exercise for them. You may want to stick to walking over the cavalettis and ground pulls. But if you have a horse who's a little more capable, challenging them with some raised pulls is going to be helpful. When you set out pulls and cavalettis, it's important to be aware of the distances. There are so many fantastic resources online to find different setups, But a good rule of thumb, walk poles should be set 2.5 to 3 feet apart. Trot poles should be 4 to 4.5 feet apart. And your canter poles are going to be 9 to 12 feet apart. The smaller the horse, the closer their stride is going to be. And once you set them up, if your horses are going through and consistently knocking them, you may consider adjusting the distance between the poles. You also want to start with less before adding more. So if your horse has never done poles before, or you're unsure if they've done poles before, start with one pole until they're comfortable with that. Then you can add in more, you can freeze them, etc. Varied terrain is such an important component to build your horses, not only tendons and ligaments and muscles, but their bone structure. When horses go on harder surfaces, there's more concussion of their leg, which is going to tell the body to build stronger bone. Now, it's important to pay attention to how much we're working on varied surfaces, because if a horse has never been out on hard surfaces and done some walking, we're going to want to keep that shorter. But as they develop and as they get stronger, we can increase the length of time they're on some of these varied surfaces. So working on some hard surfaces can be very good for the horse. Doing some walk on road base or some hard set gravel is going to help increase the concussion of that bone, as I mentioned, which is going to help develop that strength of bone. But you got to be careful because some horses have very soft and tender feet. And if they are sore going on those hard or rocky surfaces, that is not going to be a great exercise for them. Or they may need some supportive shoes or something. And that's a great conversation to have with your farrier and veterinarian. Going through some soft or deep footing is also a great way to challenge your horse. If you have access to walking through water, that is a phenomenal way to engage the horse's abdominal muscles in a very soft way. Okay, so it's not going to be a lot of concussive force. It's similar to going up and down hills, right? There's not a lot of concussive force, but going through, lifting legs out of the water is all going to help strengthen the horse and provide a little resistance as they lift and move their limbs, which will engage their extensor and flexor muscles more. Often we have snow here in Utah, not this year, but often we do, and walking horses, trotting horses through that snow is the very similar idea as to that water. Lunging is something I do a lot with our lesson horses. I find it is a lot easier to train a volunteer to be a really good lunger than it is to train a volunteer to be a really good rider. You can train them in a much quicker amount of time, and there's less room for error when you do riding, when lunging is a little more forgiving for the horse and the handler. With lunging, it is so important to be intentional. This, I think, is the biggest takeaway of the whole presentation. Be intentional in whatever you're doing. So if you're lunging a horse, we want to be paying attention to how they're holding themselves and how they're moving. I don't want them to just go out on the lunge line and drag their feet through the sand and meander around the circle. I also don't want them to go out running and bucking and kicking because they could definitely hurt themselves. Instead, I want to focus on as if I'm riding that horse from the ground. I want them to be stepping underneath. I want them to be in a good forward tempo. I want them to be stretching through their body. So working on developing that shape and that balance on the lunge line is going to support your horse under saddle. The great thing about lunging is you don't have the weight of a rider, so it's easier for that horse to pick its back up. You also can watch that horse from the ground, so it's easier to pick up on their symmetry, on their movement, and on their balance. It is important to use properly fitted equipment when you're lunging. I really love to use lunging cavesons or lunging in a bridle versus a halter because the bridle and the caveson give me a little more control and ability to shape my horse more than that halter does, just because of where that lunge line attaches. There are lots of lunging gadgets out there, and I do love a well-fit, properly done side rein. I could have an entire lecture just on lunging itself. So, takeaway for you guys, so I don't talk on forever, is if you're going to use additional equipment, it needs to be properly fit, and it needs to be done in a way that is not forcing the horse into a position, but is supporting their position. So side reins shouldn't be very tight. They should be loose enough that your horse can move its head up and down, but set at a distance so that it encourages that horse to have their nose just in front of the vertical, stretching over their back. If we have side reins on, we got to be extra aware of us pushing the horse forward, because it's not about the head and neck being set a certain way. It's actually about that inside hind leg coming up underneath the horse and that horse's back lifting. So if you're unsure of how to lunge with properly fit equipment, I encourage you to find a trainer or professional who can do a couple lunging sessions with you to teach you those nuances. But less is more. Good lunging with minimal equipment is going to really help you develop the horse without relying on some of the additional pieces of equipment. Lateral work is a little more advanced skill, but such a fantastic way to increase flexibility, strength, suppleness, and straightness in your horse. It also helps teach your horse to be a little more responsive to aids. If you've ever been on a lesson horse or teaching a lesson and that lesson horse just drags the rider into the middle of the arena, it's very frustrating for that participant and horse. So teaching that horse some lateral work, such as leg yields, is going to help that rider then be able to leg yield the horse back to the rail. Now, with lateral work, it's important to do it in balance, riding from back to front, meaning we're not trying to pull our horses somewhere, we're trying to push them into this movement. Lateral work is anything that is asking that horse to kind of cross its midline or change the way those legs are crossing each other. So rather than going straight forward, we're doing some variation of sideways or lateral movement. So a leg yield is your most simple type of lateral work. It is going forward and sideways with slight flexion away from the direction of travel. This is often the foundational lateral movement I start with horses because it is the easiest for them to figure out and do. Now, not all of our horses are going to cross as beautifully as this horse in the photo, but they should start to get some sort of abduction and adduction through those legs, which is going to increase their strength and then their stability throughout their body. There's also movements such as shoulder in and shoulder out, haunches in, haunches out, where we ask the shoulder to come off the rail or the haunches to come off the rail. Side passing, which is when you're not moving forward and you're just going left and right. Pivoting or turning on the haunches, so the haunches stay in place and the front end moves around, or turn on the forehand, where the forehand stays in place and the hind end moves around. All of these are great ways to increase your horse's flexibility and work on not just going straight forward, but that, again, abduction and adduction. And when our hips and our shoulders and our pecs get stronger, you're going to find more stability through that horse and more softness through their sides. And when a horse is laterally soft, they can stretch down longitudinally better, which then allows them to lift that top line. Lateral work can be done under saddle. It can also be done in hand, but it does take a little bit more practice to get the hang of it. Backing up is an exercise most horses can do. Backing is a great way to engage the horse's hind end. They have to tuck their pelvis underneath them and step back in diagonal pairs, which is going to really rely on their abdominal muscles. You can do this in hand or under saddle. You can back up in a straight line. You can also teach your horse to back up on a circle, doing figure eights, different movements like that. And I find backing, not always on a straight line, but adding in some turns or circles or doing an L shape really helps increase the suppleness of that horse's back up. They're a little more able to move their ribs and hind end when we start to increase the ask of that back up by taking in some different movements besides just straight. When we are backing, we want to do it in a good frame and with rhythm. So we don't want the horses head up in the air with their back dropped all hollow and stiff and resistant. We want it to be this nice rhythmic movement. Step 1, 2, 3. That way, they are moving through their body a little bit better. And that rhythm is going to make sure that they're using both sides of their body a little more evenly. When you introduce backing, you just want a few steps at a time. But my goal is all my horses can eventually do 10 to 15 steps of backing up in a straight line 2 to 3 times without that resistance. It is something I'm still working on with my herd, and it's something I do every single time I interact with a horse is before I put him away, whether it's under saddle or on the ground, I do a little bit of backing with them to help engage those muscles. There's also stretches and core stabilization exercises. Social media is full of different exercises, gadgets, ideas to help your horse learn how to use themselves and stretch out their necks, their backs, and their muscles. Doing stretches and core stabilization, such as balance pads, carrot stretches, are a really great way to get the horse moving without doing something that's really hard on their joints, like concussive forces from the trot and the canter, maybe. The stretches is something I like to incorporate a couple times a week with each of my horses. And I actually do enjoy this part with the horses. It's fun to see as they start to stretch, they get more mobility and more flexibility, and we can kind of keep track of that to see how our horse is doing. If I have a horse that can normally stretch all the way around, like the one in the photo, and one day they can't stretch all the way around, I'm going to be looking to see if that horse has some sort of injury, and maybe talking to my physical therapist, my massage therapist, my veterinarian to see what we need to do to better support that horse. And of course, we can't talk about conditioning without talking about riding. Riding is a skill that is developed through hundreds of thousands of hours. But the better rider you are, the better you can support your horse. When we are conditioning a horse under saddle, we should really be focused on the horse being straight through its body, it being balanced, and it being forward. We want to make sure that we're moving, we're stretching, and we're using our balance to help the horse be in balance. I like to use a lot of different arena figures, circles, the straight lines, the serpentines, to challenge that horse in different movements. If you're just riding around the outside of your rail, you're not doing a whole lot to condition your horse. You want to challenge them with other movements. And transitions are key. The more transitions you can do, the stronger that horse is going to get. As they go up and down gates, they're going to have to engage their core and their hind end more. So aim for 50 transitions in a schooling ride. That may be walk, trot, walk, fast trot, slow trot, but all of that is going to help support the horse. And there's so many more exercises you can do both in hand and on the ground and under saddle to support your horse. If you're interested in any more tips on conditioning, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And then the last thing we're going to just quickly discuss before we're out of time is the cool down. We want to make sure our horses are properly cooled down after work. We want to make sure they walk long enough that their pulse rate, their respiration rate can all come back down to normal. We want to bring their temperature back down to normal as quickly as possible, whether that's hosing them off in the summer or putting a cooler on them in the winter to remove excess sweat. We want to make sure our cool down is focused on relaxation, lengthening muscles, and moving any lactic acid out of those muscles through some easy mobilization exercises. This is often when I'll add in my stretches and my last minute core workouts is in the cool down phase. So my last tips for you: start slow and build. Quality over quantity. Balance, engage core, and suppleness is our goal. Groundwork is such a good foundation. There are so many things we can teach our volunteers to do from the ground, and it's not all about riding. Body work and vet care is key. If your horse isn't physically sound, physically comfortable, if they're in pain, none of the conditioning is going to be long-term sustainable. So we want to make sure that we are strengthening our horse, but then also keeping tabs on their physical capacity. And then I encourage you guys to find everyday strength habits with your horses. What's something that can be done every time that horse is being worked? Maybe there's a stretch. Maybe it's backing up the horse for 5 steps at the end of every lesson. But what can you do to start to develop little habits in your volunteers and your horses so that your horses are being conditioned even in the small moments? So thank you guys so much for coming to this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you have any questions. My email is there on the screen. Thank you.